I stood at the far edge of the grand reception hall, my fingertips brushing the coarse lace of my clearance rack dress. The air was heavy with the fragrance of lilies and costly champagne, but to me it was just another space where I was out of place. My name is Eleanor Kane, and I was 47 years old when I found myself there watching my ex-fiancé marry a woman young enough to be my daughter. The invitation had arrived like a quiet wound, thick ivory cardstock gold calligraphy curling his name around hers. I should have tossed it into the fire, but I didn't. So there I was, alone clutching a glass of Chardonnay I hadn't sipped while the crowd swirled around me as if I were a shadow. They didn't truly see me. To them, I was just Ellie, poor pitiful Ellie, the spinster aunt, the family's overlooked relic. The one who appeared at gatherings out of duty, never joy. My sister Margaret stood across the room, her laughter sharp as glass as she leaned into her husband's arm, her gaze sliding past me like I was part of the wallpaper. My cousins huddled nearby, their whispers cutting deeper than their pitying glances. "Ellie's still alone," one murmured. "What a waste." I tightened my grip on the wine glass, my jaw so tense it ached. I wanted to scream to tell them they didn't know me, not even a fraction of me. But I stayed silent. I always had. The bride was radiant, of course, her gown shimmering under the crystal chandeliers, her smile as bright as the future she thought she'd claimed. She twirled in his arms, "James, my James, once upon a time." I hadn't seen him in 16 years, not since I walked away. Not since I had no other choice. His hair was threaded with silver now, his face etched with lines, but his eyes still held that gentle warmth I'd once loved. I didn't hate him. I couldn't. But watching him hold her, watching them sway to a song we'd once hummed together, I felt something splinter inside me. Not because I wanted him back, I didn't, but because I was so damn tired. Tired of being invisible. Tired of carrying a life no one here could imagine, a life I could never speak aloud. I'd been someone else long ago. Not Ellie, the quiet woman fading into the corner. Not the one they dismissed with a sigh. I'd been more. I'd walked through fire, carried secrets that could have toppled nations. I'd saved lives, lives that mattered, lives that changed the world. But no one in this glittering room knew. No one ever would. That truth pressed against my ribs, heavy as a stone I couldn't shift. I set my glass on a nearby table, my hands trembling just enough to betray me. I needed air. I needed to escape. But then the music stopped and a voice cut through the chatter, a deep, steady voice that didn't belong in this polished, perfumed world. "Eleanor Kane," it said, not as a question, but as a proclamation. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The crowd parted like a sea, and I saw him, a man in a navy dress uniform, his chest gleaming with medals, his face carved with a quiet, unyielding resolve. A SEAL captain, I could tell from the insignia and the way he carried himself. He was looking directly at me, his eyes locking onto mine with a force that pinned me in place. The room went silent, and I felt every gaze turn toward me. My heart slammed against my chest, a frantic rhythm I couldn't slow. I didn't know this man, but he knew me. I wanted to disappear. I'd spent decades perfecting that art, blending into the background, becoming nothing to no one. But his gaze held me captive, and there was something in it that shook me. Not pity, not judgment, respect. He took a step closer, his boots clicking softly on the polished hardwood, and I saw the lines etched around his eyes, the weight of a life lived in shadows. "Ma'am," he said, his voice lower now, almost private. "I've been looking for you." My lungs seized. I didn't understand. I didn't want to. But Margaret's laughter choked off and James stopped dancing. The bride's smile faltered, her hand tightening on her bouquet. And for the first time in years, maybe in my whole life, I wasn't invisible. I don't know how to explain what happened next, not without peeling back every layer of my story. And I will, I promise you that. But this isn't a tale I can rush. It's not one I've ever told, not to anyone. So if you're here, if you're listening, I need you to stay with me. Hit that subscribe button, because this isn't just about a wedding or a single moment. It's about a life, my life, and I'm ready finally to let you in. The hall seemed to close in the air, growing dense with expectation. The captain's boots echoed as he closed the distance between us, each step deliberate, measured. I wanted to run to slip out the nearest door and vanish into the night, but my feet were rooted to the floor. Margaret's voice broke the silence, sharp and unsteady. "Ellie, what is this?" I couldn't look at her. My eyes were fixed on him, on the way his shoulders held a soldier's discipline, the way his hands rested calm and steady at his sides. He was a man who'd faced death and walked away. I could see it in the set of his jaw. I knew that look. I'd seen it in my own reflection years ago in a life I'd buried. "Miss Kane," he said again, his voice soft but commanding, like we were the only two people in the room. "I'm Captain Daniel Holt. I owe you my life." The words hit me like a fist, knocking the air from my chest. I blinked my mind, scrambling to make sense of them. I didn't know this man. His name sparked no memory, no connection. But the conviction in his voice, the unwavering certainty in his eyes, it wasn't a mistake. The crowd stirred whispers, rippling like wind through grass. I felt James's gaze on me, heavy with questions he didn't dare ask. I felt the bride's confusion, my cousin's shock, their murmurs growing louder, but I couldn't look away from Captain Holt. My voice cracked, barely a whisper. I swallowed hard, tried again. "You've got the wrong person." It was a lie, and it tasted bitter on my tongue. I'd spent so long hiding, the denial came as easily as breathing. But he shook his head, a faint knowing smile tugging at the corner of his mouth like he saw right through me. "No, ma'am," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "I haven't." He reached into his jacket, and I stiffened, not out of fear, but from a bone-deep instinct that told me this moment was about to change everything. He pulled out a small folded piece of paper, its edges worn and frayed like it had been carried through years of hardship. He held it out to me, and I stared at it, my hands frozen at my sides. "You don't remember me," he said, his voice steady, "but I remember you. And so does he." He tilted his head toward the front of the room where another figure stood, a man in a tailored suit, his face half hidden in the shadows, but unmistakable. My stomach lurched. I knew him. Not from this life, not from this gilded hall. From before, from the life I'd left behind. I took the paper, my fingers brushing his, the contact electric. It was light, fragile, but it felt like it could shatter me. I didn't unfold it, not yet. I couldn't not, with the room pressing in the silence, deafening the weight of every eye on me. Captain Holt stepped back, but he didn't leave. He stood there, waiting, his posture radiating a quiet, unshakable loyalty, like he owed me something, like he'd stand there forever if I asked him to. I don't know how long I stood there, the paper clenched in my hand, the weight of my past pressing down on me. Margaret called my name again, her voice softer now, laced with uncertainty. James took a step toward me, then stopped, his hand half raised. The bride's fingers twitched on her bouquet, her perfect day slipping through her grasp like sand. And me, I was slipping too. Because I wasn't just Ellie anymore, the woman they'd dismissed, the woman they'd pitied. I was something else, someone else, and for the first time in decades, I wasn't sure I could keep her hidden. I curled my fingers tighter around the paper, hiding it in my palm. I looked at Captain Holt, and I saw it again, that respect, that gratitude shining in his eyes like a beacon. It wasn't just for me. It was for her, the woman I'd buried, the woman I'd forced myself to forget. And in that moment, I realized she wasn't gone. She was still here, alive in my bones, waiting for this. This story isn't just mine. It's for anyone who's ever been overlooked, anyone who's carried a truth too heavy to share. If you're still here, if you're still listening, subscribe. Because we're not done. We're only beginning. The paper burned in my palm, though I hadn't dared unfold it. The reception hall buzzed with whispers, but I barely heard them. My eyes lingered on Captain Holt, his steady gaze anchoring me as the world tilted. I wanted to ask him everything, who he was, how he knew me, why now, but my throat was tight. My voice lost somewhere deep inside. The weight of that moment of his words pressed against me like a storm I couldn't outrun. "I owe you my life." I didn't know what he meant, not yet, but the truth was clawing its way up, and I wasn't ready. Not here, not in front of James, Margaret, and a room full of strangers who'd spent years dismissing me. I turned away from the captain, my gaze dropping to the floor to the polished wood, reflecting the chandelier's glow. I needed to move to breathe, but every step felt like betraying her. The woman I'd been the one I'd hidden for so long. My mind slipped back unbidden to a time when I wasn't Ellie, the quiet aunt in the faded dress. To a time when I was someone else, someone who walked with purpose, who carried the weight of lives in her hands. It was 1998, and I was 20, standing in a desert training camp, the sun blistering my skin through my fatigues. The air smelled of dust and gun oil, and my boots were caked with sand that never seemed to wash out. I wasn't Eleanor Kane there, not to them. I was Viper, a code name I hadn't chosen, but learned to wear like armor. The instructors were merciless, their voices barking orders as we crawled through barbed wire, our elbows bleeding, our lungs burning. "Faster, Viper," one shouted, his spit flecking my cheek. "You think the enemy waits for you to catch your breath?" I didn't answer. I never did. I just moved my body, learning what my mind hadn't yet grasped. Survival wasn't about strength, it was about endurance. The training wasn't just physical. They broke us down, rebuilt us. Nights were spent in windowless rooms, memorizing codes, learning to read maps by starlight, to disarm explosives with hands that couldn't shake. I was one of 3 women in a group of 30, and the men didn't make it easy. They called us weak ornamental until I outshot them at the range, until I carried a wounded dummy through a simulated firefight when they faltered. I didn't do it to prove them wrong. I did it because I had to, because someone somewhere was counting on me, even if I didn't know who yet. By 2001, I was deployed, not to the front lines, not where the cameras went. I worked in the shadows, covert ops intelligence missions no one talked about. I was 23, and I'd already seen things that aged me beyond my years. A marketplace in a city I can't name where I posed as a translator to intercept a deal that could have killed thousands. A mountain pass at midnight, guiding a team through a route I'd memorized in an hour, my heart pounding as we dodged patrols. I didn't sleep much then. The faces of the people I saved and the ones I couldn't haunted me, their eyes following me into dreams I rarely had. I was good at it. Too good, maybe. They gave me medals I couldn't keep, promotions I couldn't share. I was a ghost even to my own family. When I came home on leave, I'd sit at Margaret's table listening to her talk about her job, her kids, her life, while I nodded and sipped coffee that tasted like ash. "What do you even do, Ellie?" she'd ask, half laughing. "You're always gone." I'd shrug, say something vague about consulting, and change the subject. She never pressed. No one did. It was easier that way. But the loneliness, it gnawed at me. Not the kind you feel in a crowd, but the kind that comes from knowing no one really knows you. James came closest. We met in '99 during a rare month I spent stateside. He was a teacher, soft-spoken with a laugh that made my chest ache. He didn't ask about my work, not after I shut him down the first time. He just loved me, or tried to. We got engaged in 2002, a small ring I wore on a chain when I deployed. I thought I could have both him and the life I'd chosen, but the missions kept coming, each one pulling me further from him. I'd come home quieter, harder, my silences longer. He'd wait patient until he couldn't anymore. "I don't know you, Ellie," he said the night I left him. Not anymore. He was right. I didn't know myself either. Back in the reception hall, I blinked, the memory fading like smoke. My hand was still closed around the paper, my knuckles white. Captain Holt was watching me, his expression unreadable but kind. The crowd was restless now, their whispers louder, their curiosity a living thing. Margaret stepped closer, her perfume sharp in my nose. "Ellie, what's he talking about?" Her voice was tight, like she was embarrassed for me. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mind was still half in that desert, half in those mountains, half in the life I'd left behind. I looked at the captain again, and something shifted. His face, it wasn't familiar, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of recognition that wasn't just his. He'd said, "I owe you my life," and I didn't know why, but I felt it, the truth of it. Like a thread pulling tight across years. I'd saved people, I'd lost people, but I'd never stayed long enough to see what came after. Had I saved him or someone he loved? The paper in my hand felt heavier, like it held the answer. "Ma'am," he said, his voice cutting through my thoughts, "you don't have to do this alone anymore." I stared at him, my chest tight. Alone was all I'd ever known. It was safe. It was mine. But his words cracked something open, something I'd sealed shut years ago. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that I didn't need this, that I was fine. But I wasn't. I hadn't been fine in a long time. The bride, Clara. Her name was cleared her throat, her voice bright but strained. Maybe we should get back to the program. She laughed, but it was thin, nervous. The crowd murmured agreement, eager to move on to forget the strange interruption. James was watching me, his brow furrowed like he was seeing me for the first time. I wanted to look away, but I didn't. I couldn't. Captain Holt didn't move. He stood there, his presence a quiet command, like he was waiting for me to decide, to step forward or to run. I didn't know which I wanted. The paper in my hand was a lifeline or a noose, and I wasn't sure which. But I knew one thing: I couldn't stay here frozen pretending to be the woman they all thought I was. Not anymore. I took a step toward him, my heart pounding so loud I thought the room could hear it. The whispers stopped, the air growing still. Margaret grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. "Ellie, what are you doing?" she hissed. I pulled free, my eyes never leaving the captain's. "I don't know." I said, my voice steady for the first time that night. "But I need to find out." I stepped away from Margaret's grasp, her nails leaving faint crescents on my skin. The reception hall felt like a held breath, every eye on me, but I kept my gaze on Captain Holt. His face was steady, a lighthouse in the storm of whispers and stares. The paper in my hand was a pulse alive with secrets I wasn't ready to face. I didn't know what he wanted from me, what this moment meant, but I couldn't turn back. Not now. Not when the woman I'd buried was clawing her way to the surface, her voice louder than the one I'd used for years to say I'm fine. The crowd shifted, restless, their murmurs growing sharper. Clara, the bride, forced another laugh, her voice high and brittle. "Okay, everyone, let's get back to the celebration." She clapped her hands, but it was desperate, like trying to herd a flock of startled birds. No one moved. Not James, who stood frozen, his eyes searching mine like he was seeing a stranger. Not Margaret, whose face was a mask of confusion and something else, resentment maybe. Not my cousins, their whispers now, openly curious, their pity replaced by something hungrier. And not me. I stood there, the paper burning in my fist, my heart a drumbeat I couldn't ignore. I'd spent so long being invisible, it was second nature. At family dinners, I was the one who cleared the plates while Margaret held court, her stories about her perfect life, drowning out the silence I offered. At reunions, I was the one who nodded politely as aunts and uncles asked, "Still no husband, Ellie?" their smiles thin with pity. They called me spinster behind my back, sometimes to my face, like it was a joke I was in on. "Poor Ellie," they'd say, "always so quiet, so alone." I'd smile, let it slide, let them think they knew me. It was easier than explaining a life they'd never believe. But it wasn't just family. The town I'd moved back to after I left the service was small, the kind where everyone knew your business or thought they did. To them, I was the woman who lived in the little house on Oak Street, the one who worked part-time at the library, who kept to herself. "She's sweet," they'd say, "but a bit odd." They didn't know I'd wake at 3 a.m., my body still wired for missions that no longer came. My hands tracing the scars on my ribs, shrapnel from a night I couldn't talk about. They didn't know I'd sit in my backyard, staring at the stars, remembering coordinates I'd memorized in places they'd never heard of. The disrespect wasn't always overt. It was in the way the grocery clerk spoke slower to me, like I was simple. In the way Margaret's friends would invite me to their book clubs, then talk over me when I dared to speak. In the way Clara, before she was the bride, had once laughed at a family picnic saying, "Ellie, you're like a nun, aren't you? No life, just existing." The others had laughed and I'd smiled, my teeth gritted, because what could I say? That I'd once disarmed a bomb with seconds to spare? That I'd carried a wounded soldier through a firefight, my hands slick with his blood? They wouldn't believe me. They'd laugh harder, but I wasn't blameless. I let them think I was nothing. I let them define me. It was safer that way, easier than carrying the truth in a world that didn't want it. I'd come back from the service broken not in body but in spirit. The things I'd seen, the choices I'd made, they'd carved pieces out of me. So I built Ellie, the quiet woman, the one who didn't flinch when they called her nobody. I thought I could live like that forever. I was wrong. In the hall, Captain Holt's presence was a weight pulling me back to the woman I'd been. He hadn't moved, his eyes still on me, patient but unyielding. I wanted to ask him to stop, to leave me to my small life, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I saw Clara's friends, young women in glittering dresses, their laughter loud and careless, glancing at me, their lips curled in amusement. "What's she done?" one whispered loud enough to carry. "She's nobody." My chest tightened, the old anger stirring. I'd heard it before, but tonight it landed differently. Tonight I wasn't sure I could let it pass. Margaret stepped closer, her voice low but sharp. "Ellie, this is ridiculous. You're embarrassing us." She gestured vaguely at the crowd, at Clara, at James. "Just sit down or something." Her words were a slap, but I didn't flinch. I looked at her. Really looked at her, and saw the sister who'd once braided my hair, who'd cried when I left for basic training. She didn't know me anymore. Maybe she never had. I turned back to Captain Holt, my fingers tightening around the paper. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice quiet but steady. It was the first time I'd spoken loudly enough for the room to hear, and the murmurs stilled. He tilted his head, his expression softening, but there was steel beneath it. "Not what I want, ma'am," he said. "What you deserve." The words hit harder than I expected. Deserve. I hadn't thought about that in years. I'd told myself I didn't need recognition, didn't need anyone to know what I'd done. But standing there with the weight of his gaze and the crowd's confusion, I felt a crack in the armor I'd built. I wasn't just Ellie, the woman they mocked. I was Viper, the woman who'd saved lives, who'd walked through hell and come out the other side. And for the first time in a long time, I wanted someone to know. Clara's voice broke, the moment sharp and insistent. "Can we please move on? This is my day." She was smiling, but her eyes were hard, her hands clenched around her bouquet. The crowd hesitated, some nodding, others still watching me. James took a step toward me, his mouth opening, but no words came. I didn't need them. I didn't need anything from him, not anymore. But I needed something from myself. I looked at the paper in my hand, its edges soft from years of handling. I didn't open it, not yet. I wasn't ready, but I felt its weight, its promise. It was a piece of my past, a piece of her, and I couldn't keep running from her forever. Captain Holt's words echoed in my mind. "You don't have to do this alone anymore." I didn't know if I believed him, but I wanted to. God, I wanted to. I took a breath, my shoulders straightening. The room was still watching their whispers, a low hum, but I didn't care. For the first time in years, I didn't care. I looked at Captain Holt and nodded just once, a small gesture that felt like a leap. His eyes softened, a flicker of relief passing through them. "Thank you, ma'am." He said so quietly, I almost missed it. Margaret huffed, crossing her arms. "This is absurd," she muttered, but her voice was weaker now, less certain. Clara's friends giggled, but it was forced, their confidence shaken. James was still watching me, his expression unreadable. And me, I was still standing still, holding that paper, still feeling the pull of a life I'd tried to forget. The hall seemed to pulse with the weight of Captain Holt's words. His quiet, "Thank you, ma'am," hanging in the air like a vow. I stood there, the folded paper in my hand, a tether to a past I'd tried to outrun. The crowd's whispers were a low hum, their eyes boring into me, but I kept my gaze on the captain. His presence was a shield, steady and unyielding, and for a moment I felt like I could breathe again. But only for a moment. Clara's sharp voice cut through her tone, brittle, as she tried to reclaim her spotlight. "Excuse me, can we please get back to the reception? This is a wedding, not whatever this is." Her laugh was forced, her hands fluttering over her bouquet, like she could wave me away. I didn't move. Margaret was at my side now, her perfume sharp and cloying. "Ellie, enough," she hissed, her voice low but venomous. "You're making a scene. Sit down." Her hand hovered near my arm as if she might grab me again, but I stepped out of reach, my eyes still on Captain Holt. He hadn't flinched at Clara's outburst or Margaret's impatience. He just watched me waiting, like he knew I was teetering on the edge of something I couldn't name. I wanted to sit down. I wanted to fold myself back into the quiet, invisible Ellie they all expected, but the paper in my hand wouldn't let me. Neither would the man standing in front of me, his dress uniform, a reminder of a world I'd left behind. A world where I'd been Viper, not Ellie. A world where I'd mattered. I glanced at James still frozen near the dance floor, his face a mix of confusion and something softer regret maybe. Clara was beside him, her smile tight, her eyes darting between me and the captain. Her friends whispered behind their hands, their giggles sharp and mocking. "What's she done anyway?" one said loud enough to carry. "She's just nobody." The word hit like a stone, but I didn't flinch. I'd heard it before, nobody's spinster burden. I'd let it slide, let it define me because it was easier than the truth. But tonight, with Captain Holt's eyes on me and the weight of that paper in my hand, I felt something shift. A spark of the woman I'd been, the one who'd walked through fire and come out standing. I wasn't nobody. I never had been. The reception was supposed to end with a toast, a cake cutting, all the rituals of a perfect day. But a new event was looming, one I hadn't expected. Captain Holt had mentioned it in passing as I'd nodded to him, a formal ceremony tomorrow, a military gala in the city, honoring veterans and covert operatives. He hadn't said why he wanted me there, only that I needed to come. "It's time, ma'am." He'd set his voice low, like he was handing me a key I'd lost years ago. I hadn't agreed, not outright. I'd mumbled something about thinking it over, my heart racing at the thought of stepping back into that world. But now, standing in this hall, I felt the pull of it like a tide I couldn't resist. I hadn't planned to attend. I'd spent years avoiding anything that smelled of my past parades, memorials, even the VA office. The idea of a gala with its starched uniforms and polished speeches made my stomach twist. I didn't belong there, not anymore. I was Ellie Kane, the librarian, the woman who kept her head down. But Captain Holt's presence was a crack in that facade, and the paper in my hand was widening it. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew I couldn't stay here pretending to be the woman they all saw. Margaret's voice broke my thoughts, louder now, edged with frustration. "Ellie, I'm serious. This is Clara's day. You're ruining it." She gestured at the bride who was clutching James's arm, her face flushed. I looked at her, at the sister who'd once been my closest friend, and felt a pang of something grief. Maybe for the girl she'd been. "I'm not trying to ruin anything," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I didn't ask for this." "Then why are you still standing there?" She snapped, her eyes narrowing. "Just go home, Ellie. You don't belong here." The words stung sharper than I expected, but I didn't look away. I saw the crowd behind her, their faces a mix of curiosity and discomfort. I saw Clara's friends, their smirks faltering as they sensed the shift in the room. I saw James, his mouth opening like he wanted to speak, but he didn't. And I saw Captain Holt still waiting, his silence louder than any words. I took a breath, my fingers tightening around the paper. "Maybe I don't." I said, my voice steady now, "but I'm not leaving, not yet." Margaret blinked, her mouth opening, but no words came. The room seemed to hold its breath, the whispers fading into a heavy silence. I felt the weight of their stares, but for the first time I didn't shrink from them. I wasn't sure what I was doing, but I knew I couldn't go back to being the woman who let them define her. Clara stepped forward, her voice bright but strained. "Okay, let's just move on. The band's ready for the next dance." She clapped her hands again, but it was weaker this time, her confidence crumbling. The crowd hesitated, some turning back to their drinks, others still watching me. I felt like I was standing on a precipice, one wrong step away from falling. But Captain Holt's eyes were on me, and they were steady like a hand reaching out. "Ma'am," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "The gala tomorrow, it's not just a ceremony, it's for you." My heart stopped. For me, I wanted to laugh, to tell him he was wrong, that I was nobody, just like they all thought. But the way he said it, the quiet certainty in his voice, made the lie impossible. I didn't know what he meant. Not yet, but I felt the truth of it like a memory I'd forgotten. I looked at the paper in my hand, its edges soft and worn. I still hadn't opened it. I wasn't ready, but I knew I couldn't stay here caught between the woman they saw and the woman I was. The gala loomed like a storm on the horizon, and I was terrified of what it would mean, of what it would ask of me. But I was tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of letting their words define me. "I'll think about it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but it carried. Captain Holt nodded, a flicker of something pride maybe passing through his eyes. "That's all I ask, ma'am," he said. He stepped back, giving me space, but his presence lingered a promise that this wasn't over. Margaret huffed, crossing her arms. "This is insane," she muttered, but her voice was softer now, less certain. Clara's friends whispered again, but their laughter was gone, replaced by unease. James was still watching me, his expression unreadable, but I didn't need his approval. Not anymore. I turned away from them, my eyes finding the captain's again. He gave me a small nod, like he knew what this cost me. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew I couldn't stay here pretending to be the woman they wanted. The paper in my hand was a weight, a question, a door I wasn't sure I could open. But I was done standing still. The reception hall felt like it was holding its breath, the air thick with tension, as Clara's forced cheer faded into the background. My hand was still clenched around the folded paper, its edges pressing into my palm like a secret that wouldn't stay buried. Captain Holt's words echoed in my mind. "It's for you," and they stirred something deep. Something I'd locked away years ago. I stood there, caught between the woman I'd been and the one they all thought I was, my heart pounding so loud I was sure the room could hear it. Margaret's glare burned into me. Clara's nervous laughter hung in the air, and James's silent stare felt like a weight I couldn't shake. But none of it mattered as much as the man in front of me, his navy uniform, a stark reminder of a life I'd tried to forget. I wanted to tell him to leave, to take his words and his paper, and let me go back to being invisible. But I couldn't. Not when his eyes held that quiet reverence, like he saw the woman I'd buried, Viper, the operative, who'd walked through shadows and saved lives. I glanced at the paper, still unopened, and felt a pull, like it was calling me back to her. I wasn't ready, but I was running out of time to hide. The band struck up a new song, a weak attempt to pull the crowd back to the celebration, but the room was different now. The chatter was subdued, the laughter forced. Clara's friends whispered behind their wine glasses, their smirks replaced by curiosity. Margaret crossed her arms, her lips a tight line, but she didn't speak again. Even James seemed rooted in place, his eyes searching mine like he was trying to find the woman he'd once known. I didn't look away this time. I was done shrinking. Captain Holt shifted his boots, scuffing softly on the hardwood. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low but clear. "I'll be at the gala tomorrow. If you're ready, we'll be waiting." He didn't push, didn't demand. He just gave me a small nod, like he trusted me to find my way. Then he turned, his movements precise, and started toward the door. I watched him go, my chest tight, the paper in my hand, a lifeline or a trap, I still wasn't sure. But before he reached the exit, the double door swung open and the room changed. A hush fell, sharp and sudden, like the air had been sucked out. Heads turned, conversations died, and even Clara's forced smile froze. I followed their gazes, my breath catching, as a new figure stepped into the hall. He was older, his hair silver, his suit impeccable, but it was the way he carried himself, commanding, unapologetic, that made the room still. I knew him. Not from this life, not from this place, but from before. General Robert Langley retired, once the head of covert operations for the agency I'd served. My heart stopped. He was here, and he was looking for me. The crowd parted as he moved forward, his steps deliberate, his eyes scanning the room until they found mine. I felt like I was falling, my mind scrambling to make sense of it. Langley wasn't just a name, he was a legend, a man who'd shaped wars from the shadows, who'd signed off on missions that never made the news. I'd met him only once, years ago, in a sterile briefing room after a mission that had cost me more than I could say. He'd shaken my hand, his grip firm, and said, "You're one of the best, Viper. Don't forget it." I hadn't forgotten, but I'd tried to. "Eleanor Kane," he said now, his voice deep and resonant, carrying across the hall like a command. The room froze, every eye on me, every whisper silenced. I wanted to run, to disappear, but my feet were glued to the floor. He closed the distance, his gaze never wavering, and I saw it again, that respect, that recognition. "Ma'am," he said, stopping a few feet away, "we've been looking for you." The words hit like a shockwave. We, not just Captain Holt, not just this moment, something bigger, something I couldn't escape. My hand tightened around the paper, my knuckles white. I opened my mouth to speak, to deny it, to say they had the wrong person, but the lie wouldn't come. Not with Langley standing there, his presence a bridge to the life I'd left behind. Not with the entire room watching their disbelief a palpable thing. Margaret's voice broke the silence, shrill and unsteady. "Ellie, what is this? Who are these people?" She stepped closer, her hands on her hips, but her confidence was crumbling. I didn't look at her. I couldn't. My eyes were locked on Langley, on the faint lines around his mouth, the weight of years in his posture. He was real, and he was here, and that meant my past was no longer mine to hide. General Langley didn't acknowledge Margaret. He didn't need to. His focus was on me, and it was absolute. "Ms. Kane," he said, his voice softer now. "Almost gentle, you've been gone a long time. But we haven't forgotten." He paused, his eyes searching mine, and I felt exposed, like he could see every scar, every choice, every night I'd woken up gasping from dreams of fire and blood. "Tomorrow's gala isn't just a ceremony," he said. "It's a reckoning for you. A reckoning." The words sank into me heavy and final. I didn't know what he meant, not fully, but I felt the truth of it like a door swinging open in my chest. The paper in my hand seemed to pulse its secrets closer to the surface. I wanted to ask him why, to demand answers, but my throat was tight, my voice lost in the storm of my thoughts. The crowd was silent now, their curiosity replaced by something else, shock maybe, or fear. Even Clara was quiet, her bouquet forgotten, her perfect day unraveling. James took a step forward, his voice low, hesitant. "Ellie, what's going on?" It was the first time he'd spoken to me all night, and the sound of his voice, familiar, aching, cut deeper than I expected. I looked at him, at the man I'd once loved, and saw the confusion in his eyes, the questions he didn't know how to ask. I wanted to tell him everything, to spill the years I'd kept silent, but I couldn't. Not yet. General Langley glanced at James, then back at me, a faint smile touching his lips. "She'll tell you when she's ready," he said, his tone firm but kind. Then he turned to me again, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You don't have to decide now, Ms. Kane, but tomorrow we'll be there, and we'll be waiting." He inclined his head, a gesture of respect that felt like a salute, and then he turned, moving back toward the doors with the same commanding grace. Captain Holt followed, but not before giving me one last look, his eyes steady and sure. The doors closed behind them, and the room erupted, whispers, gasps. Clara's sharp voice trying to reclaim control. "Okay, everyone, let's dance." She called, but it was weak, desperate. No one listened. They were all watching me, their faces a mix of awe and disbelief. Margaret grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. "Ellie, what the hell was that?" She demanded, her voice shaking. I pulled free, my eyes on the doors where Langley and Holt had disappeared. "I don't know," I said, and it was half true. I didn't know why they were here, not fully, but I knew it wasn't a mistake, and I knew I couldn't run from it anymore. The paper was still in my hand, unopened, but its weight was a promise. Tomorrow's gala loomed like a storm, and I was terrified of what it would ask, of what it would reveal. But for the first time in years, I wasn't sure I wanted to hide. I looked at James, at Margaret, at the crowd that had dismissed me for so long, and I felt something new. Not anger, not fear, resolve. The doors closed behind General Langley and Captain Holt, but their presence lingered like a charge in the air. The reception hall was a chaos of whispers now, the crowd's eyes pinned on me, their curiosity a living thing. I stood there, the paper still clenched in my hand, its edges biting into my skin. My heart was a wild thing, pounding against my ribs, and my mind was caught between the present and the past, between the woman they saw and the one I'd been. Viper. The name felt foreign now, but it was mine, and General Langley's words, a reckoning, had cracked open the cage I'd locked her in. Margaret was beside me, her face flushed, her voice a harsh whisper. "Ellie, what have you done? Who were those men?" She grabbed my wrist, her grip tight, but I barely felt it. My eyes were on the doors, on the space where Langley had stood. His voice calling me back to a life I'd buried. I pulled my wrist free, not gently, and she gasped, stepping back like I'd slapped her. "I don't know." I said, my voice low but steady. It was a lie, and we both knew it. I didn't have all the answers, but I had enough to know this wasn't a mistake. Not anymore. Clara's voice cut through sharp and desperate. Can we please get back to the wedding? She was clutching James's arm, her smile a brittle mask, but the room wasn't hers anymore. The band played on a weak attempt at normalcy, but no one danced. They were all watching me, my cousins, their pity replaced by shock. Clara's friends, their smirks gone. James, his face a storm of questions he couldn't voice. I felt their stares, but they didn't shrink me. Not this time. I was done being the woman they pitied. I looked down at the paper in my hand, its worn edges soft under my thumb. I hadn't opened it yet, but I knew it held something I couldn't ignore. A truth, a memory, a piece of Viper. My fingers trembled as I unfolded it, the room fading to a dull roar. The paper was small, creased, the ink faded but legible. A handwritten note, short and stark. Viper, Kabul 2004. You pulled me out. I never forgot. D. Holt. Below it, a date and coordinates precise and unmistakable. My breath caught. Kabul. The memory hit like a flood. It was a night mission, the air thick with dust and the threat of ambush. I was 26, leading a small team to extract a SEAL unit pinned down in a compound. The intel was bad, worse than bad. We'd walked into a trap gunfire, tearing through the dark, the screams of the wounded cutting through the chaos. I didn't hesitate. I moved, dragging a man, Holt. It must have been through the dirt. His blood soaking my gloves, his weight heavy but not heavy enough to stop me. I'd gotten him to the evac point, my hands steady, even as my heart raced. I didn't look back. I never did. There were others to save, others to lose. I didn't know his name then. I didn't know he'd survived. I looked up, my eyes finding the doors again, as if Captain Holt might reappear. He'd carried this note for years, through wars and wounds, a debt he felt he owed. My throat tightened, not with pride, but with something heavier. Grief maybe for the woman who'd done that, who'd saved him, who'd walked away from that life because it had taken too much. I folded the paper, slipping it into my pocket, its weight a quiet anchor. The crowd was still watching, their whispers louder now, speculative. Who is she? Someone murmured. What did she do? I felt James's gaze heavier than the rest, but I didn't meet it. I couldn't, not yet. General Langley's words were still ringing in my ears. It's a reckoning for you. I didn't know what the gala tomorrow would bring, but I knew it was about more than a ceremony. It was about her Viper, the woman I'd been the one I'd tried to erase. A new voice broke the tension, loud and official, coming from the front of the hall. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention? The room turned, and I saw him, a man in a dark suit, standing at the podium where the toasts were meant to happen. He was younger than Langley, his face sharp, his posture military despite the civilian clothes. I didn't know him, but I knew the type: agency, high-ranking, someone who moved in the same shadows I once had. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just about Holt or Langley, this was bigger. I apologize for the interruption, he said, his voice calm but commanding. My name is Director Paul Carson, and I'm here on behalf of the Department of Defense. The room went dead silent, even Clara's protests fading. Carson's eyes found mine, and I felt a chill, not of fear, but of recognition. He knew me, not Ellie, Viper. We're here to honor someone who's been overlooked for too long. He said, his gaze never wavering. Eleanor Kane, also known by her operational code name, Viper. The room gasped, a collective intake of breath that felt like it sucked the air from my lungs. My name, my code name spoken aloud in this glittering hall, was a blade cutting through the lie I'd lived. I wanted to shrink, to deny it, but Carson's voice was relentless. Ms. Kane served this country with distinction, he said, in operations that saved countless lives. She was one of our best, and she's here tonight among you, though you didn't know it. The silence was deafening, broken only by Margaret's sharp intake of breath. Ellie, she whispered, her voice small, disbelieving. I didn't look at her. I couldn't. My eyes were on Carson, on the weight of his words, on the truth he was laying bare. The crowd was frozen, their faces a mix of shock and awe. Clara's bouquet slipped from her hands, landing with a soft thud. James took a step toward me, his mouth open, but no words came. Carson continued, his voice steady but reverent. In 2004 in Kabul, Ms. Kane led a mission that saved a SEAL team, including Captain Daniel Holt, who stands with us tonight. She risked her life and she succeeded, but she never sought recognition. She walked away carrying the weight of her service in silence. He paused, his eyes softening as they met mine. That silence ends now. I felt the room spin, my legs unsteady. I wanted to run to hide, but there was nowhere to go. The truth was out, and it was bigger than me, bigger than this moment. I saw Captain Holt re-enter the hall standing beside Carson, his face etched with gratitude. General Langley was there too, his nod a quiet acknowledgement. They were here for me, not to expose me, but to honor me. And I didn't know how to carry that. Margaret's hand touched my arm, tentative now, her voice trembling. "Is this true?" she asked, her eyes wide searching. I looked at her, at the sister who'd called me a burden, and saw something new. Fear maybe, or regret. "Yes," I said, my voice barely audible, but it was enough. She stepped back, her hand falling away, her face pale. Clara's friends were silent now, their giggles gone, their eyes wide with something like respect. My cousins stared, their pity replaced by confusion. And James, he was closer now, his voice low, almost pleading. "Ellie. Why didn't you tell me?" I met his eyes, and for a moment I saw the man I'd loved, the one who'd waited for me until he couldn't. "I couldn't," I said, my voice breaking. I didn't know how. Carson stepped down from the podium, moving toward me, the crowd parting like a tide. He stopped in front of me, his hand extended. "Ms. Kane," he said, "on behalf of a grateful nation, thank you." I took his hand, my own trembling, and felt the weight of those words, the weight of my past settling into my bones. The room was still, the silence, a kind of reverence I'd never known. This isn't just my story, it's for anyone who's carried a secret that shaped them, anyone who's been more than the world allowed. If you're still here, if you're still with me, subscribe. Because we're not done. We're stepping into the light. The silence in the reception hall was a living thing, heavy and unbroken, as Director Carson's hand released mine. His words, "on behalf of a grateful nation," hung in the air, a weight I didn't know how to carry. My chest was tight, my breath shallow, and the paper in my pocket felt like it was burning through the fabric. The crowd stared, their faces a blur of shock and something else, reverence maybe, or disbelief. I stood there, exposed, the woman I'd been, viper laid bare, in a room that had only ever known Ellie, the nobody, the spinster, the ghost. I wanted to run, to slip out into the night and never look back, but my feet wouldn't move. Not with Captain Holt's steady gaze on me, not with General Langley's quiet nod, not with the truth finally out. Margaret was closest. Her face pale, her eyes wide with something I couldn't name, regret, fear, maybe both. She opened her mouth, then closed it, her hands twisting together like she was trying to hold on to something slipping away. "Ellie," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why didn't you tell me?" There was no anger now, just a raw, trembling question. I looked at her. My sister, the one who'd laughed at my silences, who'd called me a burden, and I felt a pang of something old and aching. "I couldn't," I said, my voice soft but steady. "You wouldn't have understood." She flinched, her eyes dropping to the floor, and for the first time I saw her as she was, not the confident sister who'd always overshadowed me, but a woman grappling with a truth she couldn't fit into her world. I didn't hate her. I didn't have room for hate anymore. I was too full of memory of loss of the woman I'd been, and the one I was becoming. Clara stood near the dance floor, her bouquet forgotten at her feet, her perfect day shattered. She wasn't smiling anymore, her face a mask of confusion and something sharper, jealousy maybe, or resentment. Her friends, the ones who'd giggled and called me nobody, were silent now, their eyes darting between me and the men who'd turned their world upside down. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. Their whispers had lost their power. James was closer, his hands in his pockets, his face etched with a pain I recognized. He took a step toward me, his voice low, almost pleading. "Ellie." I didn't know. His eyes searched mine, looking for the woman he'd loved, the one he'd lost. "Why didn't you tell me?" It was the same question Margaret had asked, but it hit differently, deeper. because he'd been the one I'd wanted to tell, the one I'd almost let in. I tried, I said, my voice breaking, but I didn't know how to be her and be with you. He looked away, his jaw tight, and I saw the weight of that truth settle into him, heavy as my own. Director Carson cleared his throat, drawing the room's attention back to him. "Miss Kane," he said, his voice formal but warm, "your service has gone unrecognized for too long. Tomorrow's gala is a chance to change that, but tonight we wanted to start." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box, its surface worn but gleaming under the chandeliers. My heart stopped. I knew what it was before he opened it. A medal, the kind I'd been given in secret, the kind I'd locked away in a box under my bed, never to be seen. He opened the box, revealing a silver star nestled in dark velvet, its ribbon a deep blue. "This is the Silver Star," he said, his voice carrying across the hall, "awarded for gallantry in action. Ms. Kane earned this in 2004 in Kabul for actions that saved lives, including Captain Holt's." The room gasped, a soft collective sound that felt like a wave breaking. Captain Holt stepped forward, his face solemn but proud, and I saw the man I dragged through the dirt, the one I hadn't known had survived. He nodded to me a silent thank you, and I felt my throat tighten. Carson held the box out to me, but I didn't take it. Not yet. My hands were shaking, my mind racing with memories of that night, gunfire, blood, the weight of a man's life in my arms. I'd done it because I had to, not for a medal, not for recognition. But standing there with the room watching, with Langley and Holt and Carson waiting, I realized something. This wasn't just about me. It was about them, the ones I'd saved, the ones who'd carried my story when I couldn't. I took the box, my fingers brushing the cool metal, and the room erupted, not in cheers, but in applause, soft at first, then growing a wave of sound that felt like it could lift me or drown me. I didn't look at the crowd. I looked at the medal, at the star that held a piece of Viper, a piece of the woman I'd tried to forget. "Thank you," I said, my voice barely audible, but Carson heard. He smiled, a rare, genuine thing, and stepped back. Captain Holt moved closer, his voice low, meant only for me. "You didn't just save me that night," he said. "You saved my team, my family. I've waited years to say thank you." His eyes were bright, not with tears, but with something deeper, gratitude, unyielding and raw. I nodded, unable to speak, my chest so tight I thought it might crack. General Langley stepped forward, his presence commanding the room's attention. "Miss Kane," he said, "you are not forgotten." He raised his hand in a slow, deliberate salute, and I felt the air shift, the weight of that gesture sinking into me. Captain Holt followed, then Carson, their salutes a silent vow. I didn't return it. I wasn't that woman anymore, not fully, but I stood taller, my shoulders straight, the metal box heavy in my hands. The crowd was on its feet now, some clapping, others staring, their faces a mix of awe and shame. Margaret was crying, her hands pressed to her mouth, her eyes locked on me like she was seeing me for the first time. Clara's friends were quiet, their heads bowed, their earlier mockery a distant memory. And James, he was still there, his eyes wet, his hands clenched at his sides. I didn't know what he felt, but I knew it wasn't pity anymore. Margaret stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Ellie." "I'm sorry," she said, the words spilling out like they'd been trapped for years. "I didn't know. I should have." She trailed off, her hands fluttering, and I shook my head, not to dismiss her, but to stop her. "It's okay," I said, and I meant it. I didn't need her apologies. I didn't need anyone's. I'd carried this alone, and I'd survived. Clara approached, her face flushed, her voice small. I didn't mean to." She gestured vaguely, her eyes on the metal box, and I saw the shame in her. "You're incredible," she said, almost a whisper. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and she stepped back, giving me space I hadn't known I needed. The applause faded, the room settling into a quieter reverence. Carson spoke again, his voice steady. "Miss Kane will be honored further at tomorrow's gala," he said. "But tonight we thank her for her courage, her sacrifice, and her silence." He looked at me, a question in his eyes, and I knew what he was asking. Did I want to speak? I didn't. Words felt too small, too fragile for this moment. I shook my head just slightly, and he nodded, understanding. I turned away from the podium, the metal box in my hands, and felt the weight of their eyes on me. But it wasn't heavy anymore. It was something else, something like freedom. I looked at Captain Holt, at General Langley, at the men who'd brought my past into the light, and I nodded a small gesture that felt like a promise. I wasn't Viper, not fully, but I wasn't just Ellie either. I was both, and I was enough. The reception hall faded behind me as I stepped out into the night, the cool air a shock against my skin. The metal box was still in my hands, its weight both foreign and familiar, like a piece of myself I'd forgotten. The applause, the salutes, the stunned faces, they lingered in my mind, but they were distant now, like echoes from a dream. I walked slowly, my heels clicking on the pavement, the paper from Captain Holt still tucked in my pocket, a quiet reminder of the woman I'd been. Viper. Eleanor Kane. Both were me, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to choose. The gala was tomorrow and I knew I'd go. Not because I craved recognition, but because I owed it to her, to Viper, to the woman who'd saved lives, who'd carried the weight of secrets so others didn't have to. I owed it to Captain Holt, to General Langley, to the men and women I'd served with, whose faces still haunted my dreams. But mostly, I owed it to myself. To stand in the light just once and let the world see me as I was. I stopped at the edge of the parking lot, the stars bright above me, and closed my eyes. The night was quiet, save for the faint hum of traffic and the rustle of leaves. I thought of Kabul, of the dust, and the gunfire of the man I dragged through the dark, not knowing if he'd live. I thought of the missions after the ones that left scars no one could see. I thought of James, of Margaret, of the years I'd spent hiding, letting their words define me. And I thought of tonight, of the moment Director Carson placed the metal box in my hands, of the salutes that felt like a homecoming. I opened my eyes and looked at the box, its velvet worn but soft under my fingers. The silver star inside wasn't just a medal, it was a piece of my past, a testament to the woman who'd walked through fire. I didn't need it to know who I was, but holding it, I felt a kind of peace I hadn't known in years. Not because they'd seen me, but because I'd seen myself. The drive home was quiet, the radio off, my thoughts loud enough to fill the silence. My little house on Oak Street was dark when I pulled up its windows, reflecting the moonlight. I stepped inside, the familiar creak of the floorboards grounding me. I set the metal box on the kitchen table next to a stack of library books and a half-empty coffee mug. It looked out of place, like a relic from another life, but I didn't move it. It belonged there just as I did. I walked to my bedroom, my movements slow, deliberate. In the closet, tucked behind old coats and boxes of letters, was a small safe I hadn't opened in years. I knelt, my fingers steady as I dialed the combination. The door clicked open, revealing a folded flag, a few faded photographs, and a handful of medals I'd never shown anyone. I took out the flag, its edges soft from years of careful handling, and held it against my chest. It was from a mission I didn't talk about, a life I didn't save. But it wasn't a weight anymore. It was a memory, and I could carry it. I unfolded the flag, smoothing it out on the bed, and placed the metal box beside it. The paper from Captain Holt came next. Its words, Viper, Kabul 2004. You pulled me out. I never forgot, etched into my mind. I set it down too, a small offering to the woman I'd been. Then I stood, my back straight, my breathing even. I didn't need to hide anymore. Not from them, not from myself. The next day at the gala, I wore a simple black dress, the silver star pinned to my chest. The room was full of uniforms and suits of men and women who'd served, who'd sacrificed. Captain Holt was there, his smile quiet but proud. General Langley nodded to me, his eyes warm. Director Carson spoke my name again, and the crowd rose, their applause a wave I didn't shy from. I didn't speak, I didn't need to. My presence was enough, my silence a kind of strength. Margaret called me the next week, her voice hesitant, apologetic. She wanted to talk, to understand. I told her we would in time. James sent a letter, short but sincere, saying he was proud of me. I didn't write back, but I kept it tucked into a drawer. Clara and her friends faded from my life, their laughter a memory I didn't need. The town whispered about me now, their pity replaced by curiosity, but I didn't care. I went back to the library, to my quiet days, my backyard stargazing, but I wasn't the same. I was Eleanor Kane and I was Viper. I was the woman who'd saved lives, who'd carried secrets, who'd stood in a room full of strangers and let them see her. I didn't need their approval, their awe, their apologies. I needed only myself, my truth, my spine, my story, and that was enough. I'm telling you this now, speaking directly to you, because I know what it's like to carry a past no one sees. You don't owe anyone your story. You don't owe them your pain, your triumphs, your scars. It lives in you, in your bones, in the way you walk through the world. Hold it close or let it out, but do it for you. Not for them. Never for them. I folded the flag that night after the gala, after the applause had faded. I put it back in the safe with the medals, the photographs, the paper from Captain Holt. I closed the door, but I didn't lock it. I didn't need to. The past wasn't a cage anymore. It was a part of me, and I was free. I walked out of my house the next morning, my head high, the stars still fading in the dawn. The world was the same, but I wasn't. I carried my truth, my dignity, my name, and that was all I needed.